You're listening to Catalyst Talks, conversations with change agents, outliers, superheroes, and truly conscious leaders modeling what it is to be an unstoppable force for good and truth in this world. What lit these catalysts on fire to do their work, and what nuggets of wisdom can they share with a world literally on fire? I'm your host, Stephanie Trager. I'm a transformational catalyst and life coach to maverick change agents in business, leadership, and life. On this podcast, I wear an eclectic mix of hats, including Earthkeeper, Wayfinder, Truth Teller, Coach, Lawyer, Business, and Impact Strategist. My intention is holding space for higher purpose, peak wellness, soul mastery, and deeper impact so we can live in harmony with ourselves, each other, and nature. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. If you love it, please share and spread the word. We're on YouTube and all the podcast platforms. See the show notes on catalysttalks.com for links, and enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome back to Catalyst Talks podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Trager, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Charly Kleissner. Charly is an impact investor, and he believes that the fundamental and real meaning of wealth is to create a positive contribution to humanity and the planet, and he does that. Among many of the things that he does, Dr. Charly Kleissner is the co-founder of KL Felicitas Foundation, Social Impact International, the Central European Investment Ready Program, and Hawaii Investment Ready, which helps social entrepreneurs worldwide accelerate and increase their impact. He is the co-founder also of toniic, a global network of impact investors, and toniic's 100% Network, which is a global group of asset owners who are dedicated to 100% impact. And they currently represent more than $6 billion in assets that are actively moving into impact. Dr. Kleissner serves as chairman of the board of Impact Assets, on the board of many organizations and ventures, and he has over 20 years of experience as a senior technology executive in Silicon Valley and has held executive and senior engineering management positions at Hewlett-Packard, Next, Rightpoint, and Ariba. Among many, many of the other things I can say about Charly, I am so grateful for this conversation where we're going to dive deep into his practices and how he holds the paradox of our very linear world with a very beautiful journey of the soul and consciousness. So thank you for being here, and your attention means the world to me. And now a word from our sponsor, which is me, Stephanie, Chief Catalyst at Intentional Paradigms. If you are seeking to come home to who you really are so you can do more of the work you're really here to do in this time where we are needing to reboot our planet, whether it's the psycho-spiritual growth or healing, or you're a thought leader or ecosystem builder, and you're ready to really ripple your organization's impact, consider having a one-on-one conversation with me and explore Blaze, the evolutionary business and Awaken leadership program, or Evolve, the Evolve program, which is a beautiful journey around the medicine wheel, a journey to unleash higher purpose, peak wellness, soul mastery, and deeper impact in business leadership and life. Coming in September, we'll be kicking off the Evolve Mastery Circle, a group program, a 12-month group program for 8 awakened leaders who are ready to reboot our world. You can go to stephanietrager.com and you'll see where you can apply for one of these 8 spots and have a conversation to see if we're a fit. And if you are part of an organization, you lead an organization, and you are committed to impact, please check out how we serve groups to expand their aperture of perception from the inside out, leading to radical innovation, the innovation required for systems change, required to build and create new systems in this world we are living in right now. It is all about accessing higher states so we can leverage the fullness of who we really are, the multidimensionality of who we really are. And if you're curious how this work might help you or contribute to the growth of your organization or the mission of the group that you hold, then please check out innerworkofimpact.com and reach out to me, Stephanie. Are you ready? Let's drop in. So Charly, your purpose to help evolve human consciousness to be in harmony with the universe. And you do this by leading a spiritual, regenerative, and joyous life in service to and in community with others. And I know you as co-founder of toniic, a global network for impact investors. And I really, really appreciate who you are, who you be, and everything you do. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to be with you and your listeners, and I look forward to our conversation.
You. Well, then let's just jump in. Charly, you lead a beautiful and interesting life with some major impact. And I'm curious about your journey and really what's your waking up story?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about vignettes of stories that together, sum up how I came into a more awakened being. And a lot of different people, a lot of different circumstances, a lot of observations, a lot of reflection, have contributed to that. So I wanted to share three quick stories to give you and your listeners a sense of a couple of aspects of my waking up story, and then we can go and thread things together or explore, the deeper things around these stories or whatever. And one person that influenced me big time, for a couple of decades now is Steve Jobs. Of course, he passed away, a little bit over a decade ago, but I had the chance to work with him in the 90s for about 3.5 years, and I would not want to miss a day. And I do miss Steve today because I learned so much from him. And one of the things I learned from him was to question the status quo and to really go behind the apparent reasons why things are not working or working. He had an uncanny ability to just hone in on not just the symptoms, but the deeper meaning of, in this instance, technology. And so I miss him around because at this day and age, we're in such a dramatic transformation on a global scale, on a human scale, that we would need leaders like him who question the old way of doing things and realize that they would not lead to the improvements or the changes in systems that we need. And so that's one thought, that I had, and compare that to Bill Gates, who has made it a fortune copying things, that he thinks work really well, and he did that in a monopolistic way and was very successful. But if you copy the old way of philanthropy in order to do systemic change, nothing good is going to come out of it, right? So we cannot possibly go forward with the old way of philanthropy, with the old way of investing, in order to actually create the change that we need. And that's I think Steve would make a big contribution to that right now. The second reflection that I had was around success, right? Because at the end of my Silicon Valley career, people thought that I was very, very, very successful. And depending on how you measure success, that's certainly true. If you measure success with respect to titles and positions and possessions and what have you, then I was hugely successful. But I stepped off the rat's race, right? Because even if you win the rat's race, you're still a rat. And I didn't want to stay a rat. I wanted to become a different person, the person that I was meant to be. And so I did not confuse my success in Silicon Valley with a successful life for me. And I really mean that non-judgmental for anybody else. I'm talking about myself. And because I wrote down at that time, this is the first half of my life, and the second half of my life will actually be deeply impactful and meaningful, not successful in the old terminology. So, and then we set out, Lisa and I, my wife Lisa and I, on creating 100% portfolios and what have you. And we said, what's success for 100% portfolio? Well, if actually thousands of people copy us, if we don't accomplish it and we fail in that, but somebody else copies us and succeeds, that's still success for us. And and I would say that at the end of my life, if I have the privilege of dying consciously, that at that point in time, you will review the success of your life, right? And I think the criteria that I would like to put on myself on that one is, have I made the right choices at the moments of choice, throughout my life in order to go deeper, to make my contribution to humanity, and to be successful on that level, right? Which is very different than making a ton of money in Silicon Valley. So And that brings me up to the third little story that I wanted to share, and that brings up, my background. Here you might notice that there is a giraffe and an elephant and a little crib. And so I want to talk about my mom, my grandson, and cancer quickly, because they influenced me all very deeply. And so my mother is 93 years old, a beautiful spirit and very spiritual. And it's a privilege for me to help her prepare for her end of life. She's still in good spirits and good health, but we talk about life and death and what comes up, on a regular basis. And I'm really grateful for these discussions and what I learn from her. And then I see my 7-month-old grandson. He's not in this room because we're doing a podcast, but he's outside. And just the beauty of a fresh young life and everything in front of him, and the consciousness that he can feel in his soul, and yet it has a very, very different level of expression than my mother's at the end of her life. And then I'm reflective of my own challenges with life. Like 3 years ago, I almost died with a very bad form of cancer, and how that propelled me into even a deeper exploration of my own meaning of life. And I'm so grateful for being able to put this together. Well, first of all, to be still alive, because otherwise I couldn't really enjoy my time with my mom and my grandson. But also then it makes me reflect on my choices, like I say, on a daily basis. And I have also reminders on a daily basis about the impermanence of my own life, which I'm grateful for.
Well, there's so many things, so many threads to follow up there. Curious, Charly, you mentioned you shared so much just now, and what really stands out to me is this beginning and end of life and the consciousness in between. And so, a new life, like endless possibility, because there's no programs yet, there's no templates, there's no conditioning, and anything is possible. And like you mentioned, that goes back to your story about your work with Steve Jobs, and you're learning from him. And I think that your work really demonstrates this in so many ways. How you even say this, you have to risk, you have to take risks and try things that haven't been done, because we are faced with problems that we've never had. So right now, what is in front of, what is something that you're really excited about, that you're prolifically working on, because you are a prolific creator? And so what is the thing in front of you that's most exciting right now, besides your grandson?
We live in very challenging times, and I'm a very joyous person, but with inner joy, not fun or the external things, but inner joy of being alive and being part of the mystery and the beauty of life. Even so, we have massive challenges, on a global scale, and it's going to get probably worse before it gets better. And one of the issues that humanity faces right now is the proliferation of echo chambers, of really supported by populists and populistic leaders, as well as social media platforms that influence us algorithmically without us having a choice to push back, unless you really are very strong inside and know what you want to do. And we can talk about, how to protect yourself against that manipulation if you so choose. So in my opinion, if we don't bring together the two sides of the, of the extremists, so to speak, and have them talk to each other, then I fear that we'll end up in violence. And violence is very hard to put back into a box, right? And so, I use, if I were to prepare a panel with you, I would not use the terminology that I used, but I'm using, if we bring together the anarchists, so to speak, with the incremental improvers, then I think something good would come out of it. Right now, in a time where massive system change happens, the old system is still alive and very much in control, and the new system is not really fully born yet. And so you have people who tend to be better at one side than the other, and they don't talk to each other because a lot of times they financial, in the financial industry that I'm part of with part of my life, there's a big debate going on about what's called ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and changing the system. And usually it gets to the point where these two camps don't talk to each other. Even so, they need each other, and we need to do that. And I think similarly, in the US society, particularly right now, there's so much divisiveness, right? That it's hot on my mind to think about what contributions can I make that we don't increase this divisiveness, but remind ourselves for the common humanity that we all are, as opposed to the differences that our brains so stupidly make up for us to believe in, which is really an illusion and wrong. So that's big on my mind, because it's getting quite dangerous right now with respect to that. We can talk about other things that are going on in my mind too, but I don't want to, monopolize.
We'll get there. I want to know everything going on in Charly Kleissner's mind right now, actually. But no, what you just said brings up the idea of there's such a big issue here, and that the division, right? The division, the derision, you're wrong, I'm right. And can we both be right? Can we both be right? Because if I believe what you believe, I might be doing and saying what you say. And if you believe what I believe. And so I think that's the meeting ground, though. But just kind of side note, you mentioned ESG, and I think there's so much, what I call the mainstream effect, right? Like mainstreaming sustainability, mainstreaming impact. That's the goal. We want everyone to jump on board with the good stuff. And what happens gets watered down. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because how is that impacting the evolution?
And maybe that's an opportunity for me to explain a little bit about deep impact, because for 4.5 years ago, just before I got sick, I was seeing the ESG freight train coming our way, the impact train, and everybody jumping on it and declaring victory and declaring, oh, we're now all doing good things and we will save the world. Well, the fact of the matter is, even if all the $150 trillion of impact capital in the world would move into ESG, the fact of the matter is that injustice would increase, not decrease, that inequality would increase, not decrease, and that we would not be able to mitigate climate change. So ESG is better than non-ESG, right? And it's necessary, but not sufficient to do systemic change. And so, the whole system change idea, so then the question to me is, why don't we just demand system change? Because we know what has to be done, right? We know about the principles of system change. We know about circularity. We know about resiliency. We know about regeneration. We know about all these renewable energy and what have you. And yet we don't seem to demand it as humanity. So what's going on here? So the more I thought about, well, it's not just the financial system and the economic system that's designed incorrectly. We know the right design, so why don't we actually enforce the right design? The more I understood that it actually is a reflection of humanity's consciousness. And so humanity's consciousness right now is precarious, right? Because we allow, populists to take over the narratives. We allow old industries to continue to pollute the planet and really not treating humanity right. And even if we all agree on how to change the system, I think without an elevated consciousness that gets us away from the illusion of being special, the illusion of not being part of living systems, without that elevated consciousness, we will not be able to manage this major transformation that has started to begin right now. And that's changing from an unsustainable economic and financial system and consciousness to a sustainable one where 8 billion people can live a happy and inspired life and self-actualize as opposed to not. And that's how I define deep impact, inspired by Arnenaeus, who coined the terminology of deep ecology. And the way that he coined it was similarly, as I suggest, to differentiate between ecology and deep ecology is one being anthropocentric, human-centric. The other one is non-anthropocentric, it's non-human-centric. And that spoke to me, because if I think about how we deploy our money, if we only deploy it with our brain, we will not have an opportunity to go deep, because our brain does not go deep. It produces thoughts. That's its job, right? Now, it's part of the global consciousness, but some people don't realize that, not because they're bad again, but because they've never experienced that level of connectedness from their brain and their hearts and their souls to the universal consciousness, right? And so that's really, I think, the objective of deep impact is to do these deeper, to not just scratch the surface on treating the symptoms of our systems, but change them holistically and develop the right level of consciousness so that we can actually do that. So that's the two planks of deep impact, and how to mainstream impact, because mainstreaming ESG is not going to do system change. Mainstreaming what people incorporate into the current system of philanthropy and the current system of maximizing profits is not going to do system change, right? So we know that, and so we have to do a different thing if we want to actually change the system that would allow our species to continue living, hopefully, a meaningful life on this particular planet.
Wow. So for people who are listening who don't know how you do that, and one of the ways I've witnessed you do that is you create templates, like you just said, with the 100% portfolio. If it didn't work for you, you'd have this template for others. It could work. So you, even with your own life, how you approach deep impact, it's clearly systematic. You share this on your website. You share your process, and so you've created a system and a model for exploring the deep intentional your principles for deep impact, and then you share this with other people. So for people who don't know anything about toniic or how you might be facilitating that, why don't you give a little bit of background around how toniic came into being what it is and where you facilitate deep impact among others?
Yeah, and maybe before that, because you prompted me to say, well, how do you actually then do that, right? I didn't explain that yet, and so so once that I realized that really it's a consciousness issue, then the question is, well, how do you change consciousness of humanity, right? And the answer to that one is you have to change yourself. And so, because your own life is the most creative thing that you will ever do during a lifetime. And so and if you think about it that way, and that you only have one, and that you want to make it impactful, then you're on the right track. And also think about, if you're a very agitated person, that's very anxious, right? And many of us are, but if you tend to be that all the time, then it's very hard to actually exude positive energy, which is necessary, because that's how the universe works. Positive energy creates more positive energy. And if you have intentions that are non-ego based and they're detached from the outcome, then the positive energies will augment your positive energies into realizing the intentions that are non-ego based and detached, right? And the same is true, however, for negative energy too. It attracts negative energy. And so if you're very agitated, it's very difficult for you, and you don't do this consciously. That's your unconsciousness is doing these energy projections, unless you learn how to do it, which you can. But that's deep mindfulness practice, that you could practice if you so choose, and then you can do it mindfully too, meaning with your conscious mind as opposed to your unconscious mind. But your unconscious mind does it either if you want it or not, and therefore you send out these signals knowingly or unknowingly, and they will align with the energies of the universe to actually make a positive contribution. So if you're working on yourself to be at peace, to be calm, to be loving, to be embracing, to be centered, right? Then that energy will speak for itself, like I said, not even knowingly, but unknowingly. And that will enable you then, if you so choose, to make a contribution to elevating the consciousness of the people around you and the things around you and the planet as a whole. So the way to do that, if you agree and want to do the same thing, is actually then to develop your own mindfulness practice, whatever that is. That could be, for me, it's a combination of yoga, meditation, reflection, nature, shamanic viewing, you know, a bunch of stuff that people knew since they existed, and that, you know, for 10,000 years, you know, with the shamans and all that. So we know that if we do these practices consistently and challenge ourselves to the point where actually it is hard. So if you don't, if you want to change yourself and it's easy, you're not changing yourself, because it's hard work to change yourself. And it's uncomfortable. And in order to get at peace, you know, you need to work hard on yourself to really do that and not get phased. So this is, you know, the last piece of my own journey is I discovered that we need to elevate consciousness, and then I discovered that I need to do my own work in order to help do that. And this is how you actually do it. And I do a bunch of, you know, activities in reality, not just in my mind and consciousness. And one of them was co-creating toniic 11 years ago. And that was because at the time of system change in the financial system, you know, which was just starting 15 years ago, we saw that we had to change all sides of the system. So now back from consciousness to intellect, okay? So on the intellectual side, you do a system map. How does the system work? Well, you have demand side of capital, supply side of capital, you have intermediaries, you have technology, and you have regulatory frameworks that define how these transactions work. And so at the beginning of systemic change of a system like this, we needed to invest in all sides of the system in order to initiate the system change. And on the supply side of capital, you know, we wanted to enable people like us, high net worth individuals and foundations and what have you, to deploy their capital with more consciousness and meaning. And that's why we created toniic 11 years ago. And now it's a thriving community of humanists, you know, who really want to make a difference with their capital, and many people within toniic also with their lives. I would say pretty much everybody. And we have, you know, I've helped create deep impact circles for toniic, which are exploring the consciousness side of things and difficult questions like, well, aren't we impact investors also benefiting from the existing system? Yes, we do. Aren't we also contributing to that? Yes, we do. But you know, but how can we get out of that? And what are we willing to contribute to this, right? How much is enough? You know, how much do we need? And those are the questions that we explore on the deeper meaning, you know, that go beyond just, is that an A, B, or C level of investment?
Oh, thank you for that. I have a body of work called the Inner Work of Impact. And, you know, that's kind of my portal for the awakening, well, one of the portals for awakening consciousness. And one of the intentions of that work is around expanding the aperture of our perception, because, you know, we can, you know, you might be in this place of love and exuding the positive energy, and yet still have a limited perception of the multidimensional aspect of who we really are, the holographic nature of everything, right? When we're doing our inner work, we realize that I just experienced a serious leak / kind of flood in my house. Okay, where am I leaking energy? Where are my pipes broken? You know, like, so that those kinds of questions that are not like, we're not conditioned with them. So what are your thoughts around that? The level of perception required for the true systems change?
Well, the only way to, you know, I like the opening up the aperture, right? Is really, again, to go beyond your mind, unfortunately, right? Because I have a strong mind. My mind has a PhD in computer science and constantly segments the market and all this and data and analysis and blah, 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 right? And makes up all these stories. And so if I were just in my mind, I would not have discovered, you know, the power of your existence that goes beyond your mind, right? Because if you just live in your brain, that's all you experience. And if you don't, you know, and as a successful manager in Silicon Valley, I believed the projections of my brain that I was in charge of predicting the outcome of my actions with respect to delivering products into society, right? And that, of course, if you know how to do that well, you can do that. But if you do it really well, you don't see any other opportunities, and you rob yourself of the opportunities of synchronicities and things that I just said before, namely the universe actually supporting you in doing what you do. And I'm still amazed sometimes at what happened to my life and our lives after I opened up my aperture to not be constrained by my brain anymore, but to pay more attention to intuition, to pay more attention to synchronicity, to pay more attention to my gut levels, right? Because they are usually more righter than what we're trained as executives to watch out for the opportunity cost of doing this and that. I was wrong for so many times, right? And then without, like I said before, without doing the hard work of actually doing mindfulness work longer than just a day or two or a week or two, you will not be able to totally open up your aperture. It doesn't work that way. Think about maybe just yoga as one example, right? And so if you have a yoga practice, maybe that goes beyond asanas, but also most yoga practices at least have pranayama, breath work associated with this, which is already going beyond your brain, because the breath is a very powerful tool, as the yogis and yoginis experience by doing the practice, in actually cleaning the energy paths in your body, and then letting your body, if you practice long enough, you will only experience that if you practice long enough, let your body adjust itself to the asanas and the breathing without your mind interfering and telling it what to do. That's when you're in the flow. That's when you're in the universal flow of the universe, right? And you cannot do that if you're a beginner, if you're practicing, if things hurt, because then your mind is distracted by hurtness, by looking good, or by comparing yourself to somebody else. You got to work on your own postures, on your own balance, and not to reach a balance, but to maybe reach an unbalance, because that way you know how to deal with the unbalances that life sends you all the way, right? And so so every mindfulness practice has this transition point from being a beginner to really being able to take advantage of aperture openings that mindfulness practice teaches you how to do. A deep yoga practice teaches you exactly where your body is at. And I'm my worst enemy. I didn't detect that I was getting sick, because my brain overlaid this, and it was a forceful reminder. Well, I didn't do my own practice that I talk about, and etc. So everybody, including advanced practitioners, need to constantly remind themselves of that. And so, or just quickly meditation, because it goes to the brain too, and the thoughts, right? So if you decide to become a meditator, then you will predictably discover that you're not your thoughts. And once you know that you're not your thoughts, you don't confuse the two anymore, right? And you say, okay, well, here's a thought coming and going, and there's another one coming and going. And you know that that's part of the human existence, just like feelings are produced also by the brain and your heart. They're part of your existence. They don't not exist, but they don't define who you are. And that's the difference. If you don't do the practice enough, then you will continue to be defined by your thoughts and by your feelings only, as opposed to by deeper humanity that you experience doing the mindfulness practice. And once you experience that, then because you have experienced it, nobody can take this away, even so current scientific methodologies don't allow them to measure it yet, and therefore it doesn't exist to them, but it exists to you. And I had about an out-of-body experience, early in my life, so I knew that I was not my body. I learned how to do meditation, so I knew I'm not my thoughts. And then the question is, well, who are you? If you're not your thoughts and your body, well, you're your soul, right? And that's the existence that's deeper than your brain and your heart. And that's how I would like to see impact investing go, not with your brain, not with your heart, but with your soul.
Mm. Mm. So how do you hold the paradox? Because, right, we are souls. Our souls are multidimensional. Our souls are this, you just laid out the path to access the portal. and then really the holding the paradox of, we also live in this very three-dimensional reality. And how do you merge, like, it's the gift in that deep impact journey is merging the power of both, right?
Yes.
And being able to be in the linear, being able to be in the soul, and then knowing when and how to merge them gracefully. That's what
That's beautifully said, Stephanie, because if you have to force yourself to migrate between these worlds, it's kind of awkward, right?
Yeah.
And when I reflected on the values of my life, right, then just bear with me, because the third value speaks to the answer of what you just asked me. The first value, and not necessarily in priority order, is integrity. Comes up in my mind. Integrity, to be high integrity towards your own purpose in life, not to not lie, not to do the simple things. But once you decide, once you found out, I should say, what the purpose of your life is, then leading a high integrity life is actually actualizing your life on that level. And which brings up my second value, and that's courage to make the right choices as you go along this trajectory, because you have to make choices every day, every hour. And we all know what the high integrity choices are, but we sometimes choose not to do them. And so, continuing to do improvements on that. And then the third one is really speaks to your question. That's inner joy. And inner joy comes along while we have our mind and our body. Even so, I was a little critical about it. I love my mind and my body. And as long as I have them, I want to experience the joys of doing that. And so next week, I'm a mountain person, and I have a lot of regenerative. I get a lot of regeneration out of being in nature, and so I like to hike up the mountains on my skis. So ski touring, and so I go ski touring next week to give my body and mind a workout in being joyful and appreciate, the just the beauty of being in nature. And that in and by itself will nurture my soul as well, but and so I'm very cognizant, having been really, really sick, that a really, really sick body is not a fun vessel for my soul. Even so, so as long as I have the choice of keeping my mind and body in shape, I try to do so in order to give my soul a bigger home to do its impact work.
How do you're so deeply you're deeply actualized in all of these words, this that you're speaking of, you hold it, you are it. And when you're sharing the frameworks and the how to, how to create your own model for deeper impact, how do you feel like it lands? Do people instantly get it? Is it like, oh, you follow these steps, create your works, and everyone gets it?
No, and I don't expect that, right? So I really want to be very understanding and non-judgmental. So people are at the levels that they're at, and good, and no, there's no better or worse, no up or down. And but when you said you are, you really hinted at the people who understand the difference deep down, not just with their brain. They understand the difference between, let's say, thinking that you're detached and being detached. If you think that you're detached, then it's an intellectual exercise, and most people confuse the intellectual exercise with actually that they are, right? And then but you have some simple tricks. If you own a house, or how attached are you to that house? Well, I'm kind of attached to it a little bit, here and there, and then it burns down, exercise of non-detachment, and all the way to detaching from your own life, which is the most difficult thing to do. And hopefully you don't have to practice this, because it's tough work. But if you get a chance to practice dying, it's also very rewarding, because it leads you to a deeper appreciation of what's really going on, right? In preparation for that. And it forces you to deal with more difficult questions about, who are you really, and what's after you're gone? Well, not much, right? You leave a little bit of energy here and there, but your ego is certainly makes you more humble and maybe more joyful too. And so and you can practice being detached as well. And so I think the people who go into that level of practice, they are on the path of really, understanding that. We also get to a point where it's really hard to express in words, because our brain expresses itself with words, and what you actually experience is not necessarily, well, it's certainly not just expressed by your brain, and therefore cannot totally be expressed by language. And therefore, people have this, if you read the holy scriptures, be that the Bhagavad Gita, or or any of any of the old scriptures, then you will see how difficult, or to me, Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and all those things that I love, they all struggle with expressing what you experience in the non-dual world, when you actually experience universal love or universal oneness with everything. How do you express that? Because your mind doesn't think that that's true, actually. So it's but practice will lead you into these spaces, and then it's an experience that you have that makes it real, and very real for you and for many others.
Yeah, and you mentioned some shamanic practices before. For me, that path of shamanism is what really woke me up, and was very young, and it was recognizing, like, this is oh yeah, I'm nature, I'm from earth too.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, like, you can do you can practice yoga and meditation, and it's still and be sitting inside on your mat and still be like having to navigate yourself, because you're there in it. But when you're in nature, you're surrounded by, you can't deny it, right? And so those
you could I mean, lots of people still do, right? And but nature is quite powerful. If you let it in, it will help you synchronize your energies with nature, as opposed to out of sync, which most of us are. And that's really what's going on. And then you feel one with nature if you actually sync up with it, right?
Yeah, so that's like a big exercise for the large financial institutions, sustainability, ESG. Like, my biggest dream was, let's just have a big party in the jungle. We'll all wake up.
Yeah. So the shamanism, if you there's very simple practices too. If you go outside and you just observe, right, with your senses, but then what you see, what you smell, what you hear, and you can really awaken your senses deeper to what they normally transmit into your brain. And what happens then is you have these shamanic three-dimensional, very intense types of views, because you're not limited by the normal. I'm sure that my little grandson has these right now, because his brain hasn't learned yet how to just interpret it one way, and then they forget how to interpret it a different way, right? The brains. But you can retrain your brain to see shamanic by just doing it, and then you will have these experiences, right? And so that's again, you just have to do it often enough that it happens to you, and it will predictably happen.
Yeah. And I think another piece to add to that is to start off with the premise that there's so much more happening in the invisible that we can't see right now. And so if that is true, and then we awaken our senses, what might we see or feel?
Yeah. And you don't even have to do magic mushrooms to do that.
Yeah. But so with that's like, with all of the beingness that you are and what you're doing right now, do you also kind of hold, and I think I've read and I know a little bit about you. So do you also hold that premise that, everything you think might actually be wrong, or that or not wrong necessarily, but to being willing to be challenged about our understanding of the nature of reality?
Yes and no. If my brain speaks, then absolutely yes. If I am in the flow, as I expressed before, then I actually live in truth. And and then in the small. So I wish that I could change from leading, how did I express that? You know, leading a life where I sometimes get glimpses of enlightenment, to an enlightened life where sometimes I'm inconveniently interrupted by what they call reality. And I'm it takes, I don't think that I will get there in my lifetime, but I'm making some progress on that. And so if you live in that moment of unison, you know, it's like this whole thing. There's a whole industry around enlightenment and mindfulness training, and they try to lead you on a perpetual path. But once you understand what we just talked about, the path is over. You have arrived. If you practice it, there's no other truth. You have discovered it, and then it's just really, if you hang on to it too much, it disappears. That's how it works, right? And you know, you can practice that if you go into 10-day silent meditation retreats, like a vipassana type of thing, where on day 6 and 7, you see how your subconsciousness and your consciousness actually interplay and influence each other. And so when you start to experience your body as an energy flow and you want to hang on to it, it actually disappears because the mind interrupts that flow. And similarly, if you want to avoid the pain of sitting for 10 hours, well, then you're trapped into avoidance as opposed to being. So those are all practices of being, right? Which train, you know, your being to be, as opposed to your brain of thinking it is. So kind of, yeah. So.
Yeah, there's a few dimensions in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but that's, you know, so that's, I think that's the if we could just figure out how the majority of people would be able to experience the oneness with the universe, then we would have mastered the level of consciousness to elevate into the point where we would not allow to hurt ourselves, you know, to that extent with our systems that we create, with the stories that that guide our lives. And so, but like I said, that's usually hard work, you know, to get there. And so unless you're instantaneously, you know, put it forward, which happens maybe too, I had to work a little bit on myself with some unsuspected you know, bumps up.
So, yeah, unfortunately, that's what, for me, I attribute a lot of my, when I hit those bumps, it's where's the cognitive dissonance right now. And I feel like that's also holographically, and keep using these words, but it's true. It's like that what I'm experiencing is what humanity is experiencing. So from that, how would this land for you? Like, I really do believe, when I see all of the craziness erupting right now, the destruction of the environment, just what's happening in Ukraine, in Europe, what's happening everywhere, all over the world, where is that in me? You know, like, where does Putin live in me? Where does the destruction live in me? Where does my road rage contribute to that, or whatever it is? You know, it's having the shadow,
that. The shadow sides, you know, of ourselves, and you can work. We all need to work on that, right? And continue to work on that, and you will be able to take the edges off. Doesn't mean that you don't have anger, or, you know, come up once in a while, but if you really work on it, it doesn't come up that much. And it does, when it comes up, you know how to recognize it and then deal with it, right? And I think, again, if you just let it happen and let you be defined by your road rage, which is easy to do for humans, then that's the result. And I'm not, you know, saying that everybody can do that, but that's and technology, you know, is also you know, an interesting evolution now, you know, that is at the crossroads of being co-opted by the power structures and the people in control, to actually not to take the control away from them, obviously, but to cement the control into how they manage the systems in order to gain more advantages for themselves out of it. And that's also a very up-to-date story, right? That's a challenging one. Just like the wake up story is challenging, and then how we are manipulated by the existing power structures and the subtle technologies, you know, is also a story that we need to expose and and consciously decide that we don't want to have that happen because it's so subtle and it takes so advantage of how our subconsciousness and consciousness work with each other, that unless you consciously work against it, that you will be manipulated by it, right? And
yeah, and as a technologist yourself, how do you see technology helping solve where we are?
yeah, well, so that's you know, I think on the financial system side, the whole, or actually the Web 3.0 side, the whole decentralized stack is in principle a good progress. But if we ever get there, which looks like we could in the next 5 to 10 years, a really decentralized way of doing the internet where nobody can fully trace you anymore, unless it comes along with an elevated consciousness, it's also very, very scary, because just like an operating system, it can be used by the terrorists or by the angels, right? And therefore, if we don't have an elevated consciousness, then I fear like the dark force will most likely win until the system breaks down under its own weight, because it's not sustainable, because it's against life, against the universe, right? So eventually it will catch up with it, but it will predictably be too late for our species if we let that happen. And that's, at the same time, we could use, some technology like tokenization and blockchain and what have you for a positive impact, right? And we could decide that, instead of doing cryptocurrencies just to do speculation, that we could actually do, we could NFT the hell out of positive impact, and only that. And that's that's what I'm trying to do a little bit with the combination of technology, consciousness, and impact, since I understand all the technologies and what they can do and cannot do, right? And but again, we're very much in the minority of because it challenges the powers to be, and therefore it will be a harder transition unless we wake up a little bit sooner.
Mm. And with that, what would be one nugget of wisdom, Charly, that you would share with folks who are saying, who are struggling with something right now and don't realize that awakening is the path out of it? What would you say?
There's so much struggling going on, right? And I struggle too. I just have my ways of, working with myself. And so whenever I get into a modus where I feel like I'm struggling, I remind myself of what I need to do in order to get out of that. And usually I'm successful, right? And because I've learned how to do that. Doesn't mean that I don't get to struggle. It's just that I'd get out of it maybe easier than if you haven't learned how to get out. And while you do that, be compassionate to yourself. So I see so many, particularly young people, who are so driven by making a deeper impact and a positive impact, and they run so against the systems all the time, and it's so easy to get cynical or disappointed, or saying, well, it's all their fault, right? Stick with it, because like I said, positive energy creates positive energy, and there's many of us out there that you can connect with, that will give you strength. You cannot do that on your own. I cannot do it on my own. You cannot do it on your own. We need our networks. And so connect with the positive people, with the joyful people, with the people who want to make a positive contribution, and stay away from the toxic ones. They don't help. There's no need. You cannot help them unless they want to help themselves. And then that way you will be able to get out of the whatever funk you might be in once in a while in these challenging times, but more importantly, you will be able to transcend out of that into making your own positive contribution.
Thank you. That reminds me of one more thing that I'd love to hear you speak to about, which is grief. Despair and grief are also like really, the despair and grief are actually running really, really high right now. And like you said, those are like really low frequencies, and we want to raise the energy. How do we stay in a high frequency, a high, place of love and peace while we're holding such levels of despair?
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, that's a big question. So grieving, um, either if you lose a loved one or you grieve because humanity is so self-hurting, right? Which a lot of people grieve right now, is something that you need to give time and space for. Just like anger, if you have anger coming up and it does happen to you, then give it the space and recognize it. Don't try to hide it, right? And so then grief particularly needs its time to be sorted out. And if you rush it too much with your brain saying, oh, this is not happening, you actually do it injustice, right? Because the way that we're built, we need to go through a grieving process in order to come out on the other side. Not saying that we didn't grieve. The grief is still there, but it's in a different form, it's in a different shape. And then when it reminds you, it's not all consuming anymore, right? And time is a wonderful healer in that. And so it's good to grieve, because that's what part of the human experience, but don't get stuck in it, because then it becomes negative. Like many of these things that we talked about, have a beautiful positive expression and a more challenging, darker expression. And as you recognize that, you have the choice. We talked about choices too. Choose wisely how to increase, the positive expressions and decrease the negative ones over time. And if you work on that consciously, it will happen, right? Because it's you don't work on it in order to be a worse person. You work on it in order to be a better person, in order to do something for somebody else. That's the ultimate motivation, right? Yeah. And that's a positive motivation. Therefore, it will work.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Charly, for being with us today. I really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit deeper and sharing you with this audience. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. It was good. And thanks for the guidance into our conversation. I really enjoyed it. And hope your listeners did too.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Catalyst Talks. Stay tuned for what's up next, and please subscribe to our podcast and rate us wherever you listen. You'll find these all at catalysttalks.com. Join the conversation on social media, and if you'd like to reach out, please send me, Stephanie, a private message through stephanietrager.com. Your attention means the world to me. Thank you, thank you, thank you.